The Clay Giant and the Boy Who Believed. Nathan lived in a small, peaceful village nestled beneath the shadow of a towering mountain. The village was quiet, surrounded by forests and open fields. And the people lived simple but happy lives. However, recently, there was a growing unease in the village. Every night, the ground trembled beneath the weight of heavy footsteps. And a low, rumbling sound echoed through the valley. At first, the villagers thought it was just the wind or perhaps the sound of distant thunder. But soon, they realized that the source of the noise was something much more terrifying, the giant made of clay. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Nathan saw the giant for the first time, towering above the treetops. The giant's massive form seemed to stretch to the heavens. His body was made entirely of clay, and with each step, the earth shuddered beneath his weight. The villagers were terrified. They locked their doors, hid behind shutters, and whispered in fear, convinced the giant would destroy everything in his path. But Nathan, always brave and curious, stood at the edge of the village and watched the creature move slowly across the landscape. The giant's face was grim, and his shoulders slumped as though burdened by a deep sorrow. His movements were not those of a fierce destroyer, but of a being weighed down by something much heavier, loneliness. The next morning, Nathan could not shake the image of the clay giant from his mind. While the villagers talked in fearful whispers, Nathan felt a deep curiosity. He wasn't afraid of the giant. Instead, he felt a strange sense of empathy. He had seen the sadness in the giant's eyes the night before. Perhaps there was more to the creature than they realized. Without telling anyone, Nathan set off toward the mountain. The sun had barely risen when he ventured into the forest, the trees towering above him like silent sentinels. The air was thick with mist, and the path was rough and winding. But Nathan didn't mind. His determination pushed him forward. As he climbed higher up the mountain, he noticed large footprints in the dirt, massive, deep impressions left by the giant's feet. The ground shook slightly beneath him with each distant thud. Finally, after hours of walking, Nathan reached the river. There, standing at the water's edge, was the giant. He was even more enormous up close, his clay body cracked and weathered by time. The giant stared at the flowing water, his eyes distant and filled with an unspoken sadness. Nathan took a deep breath, summoning all his courage, and stepped forward. "Hello," he called softly, unsure of what to expect. The giant turned, his eyes locking with Nathan's. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The giant's gaze was searching, as if trying to understand the small boy who dared approach him. "I'm Nathan," the boy said, his voice steady despite the knot of fear in his stomach. "What's your name?" The giant blinked slowly, his great body shifting with a low groan. I don't have a name," he said in a deep, rumbling voice that echoed through the valley. "I am nobody." Nathan's heart ached at the giant's words. "You have a name," he said gently, stepping closer. "Everyone has a name." The giant's eyes softened, though his face remained full of sorrow. "Not me. I am just the clay giant, the one that everyone fears." Over the next few days, Nathan returned to the mountain to visit the giant. He didn't tell anyone, knowing the villagers would only become more afraid if they knew. But Nathan felt a deep connection with the giant. The more he learned about Gorr, as the giant had come to call himself, the more he realized that Gorr wasn't just an imposing figure. He was a creature filled with loneliness and regret. Gorr told Nathan his story. He had once been created long ago, an ancient being formed from the clay of the earth itself. His purpose was to protect the land, to guard it from any who might threaten it. But over the centuries, the world had changed. Villagers had built their homes on the land, and with their arrival, Gorr's role as protector became unnecessary. He had wandered the mountains, seeking companionship, but his great size and strange appearance made him an object of fear. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," Gorr said, his voice tinged with sorrow. "But when I approached the villages, they screamed and ran. They called me a monster." Nathan looked at the giant with compassion. "I don't think you're a monster." Gorr's clay face creased in confusion. "But why do they fear me? What am I to do?" Nathan thought for a moment. "Maybe they don't understand you. Maybe they need to hear your story." Gorr shook his head, his massive hands trembling. "I've tried, but no one listens. They only see my size, my shape." Nathan took a deep breath. "Maybe you don't need to change. Maybe they just need to know you." Nathan was determined to help Gorr, but he knew that the villagers would never believe him if he simply told them the giant's side of the story. They would be too scared. So, Nathan hatched a plan. "I'll go back to the village," he said one afternoon, sitting on a rock beside Gorr. "I'll talk to the villagers. I'll tell them your story." Gorr looked at Nathan, his eyes filled with both hope and doubt. "You would do that for me?" Nathan nodded. "Of course. They need to understand that you're not dangerous. You just need a friend." Gorr sighed, the sound like a gust of wind through the trees. "I am not sure they will listen." Nathan smiled. "They will. They just need someone to show them the way." The next morning, Nathan gathered his courage and went into the village square. He didn't tell anyone where he was going, but he knew he had to try. The villagers were busy with their daily routines, but Nathan spoke to them calmly. "The giant is not a monster," Nathan said, standing before the villagers. "I've spoken with him. He's lonely and sad, and he just wants to be understood." The villagers stared at him, their faces filled with disbelief and fear. "You don't understand," Nathan continued. "He's not going to hurt anyone. I promise." The villagers were unsure. The idea of befriending the giant seemed impossible to them. They had heard nothing but fearful stories for as long as they could remember. And Nathan's words, though sincere, only made them more nervous. "That's just what the giant wants you to believe," one of the villagers said, clutching his staff. "He's been terrorizing us for years." "He's not terrorizing anyone," Nathan said firmly. "He's just looking for someone to listen." The villagers remained quiet, uncertain of what to believe. But Nathan didn't give up. He told them that he would bring Gorr to the village to show them his peaceful nature. And he asked them to meet him by the river. "I'll prove it to you," he said. "Please. Just trust me." Reluctantly, the villagers agreed to come. They followed Nathan up the mountain, their hearts heavy with doubt and fear. When Nathan led the villagers to the river where Gorr stood, the giant's massive form loomed over them. His eyes were filled with apprehension. But Nathan stepped forward, signaling for the villagers to do the same. "I told them about you," Nathan said to Gorr. "They're here to listen." Gorr knelt down slightly, his great body creaking. The villagers stood frozen in place, too afraid to move. But Nathan didn't let their fear stop him. "Gorr isn't a monster," Nathan said again, looking into the eyes of the villagers. "He just wants to be a part of this world. He wants to help." Gorr's deep voice rumbled softly. "I am sorry for scaring you. I never wanted to be a threat. I only wanted a friend." For the first time, the villagers saw the sadness in his eyes. Some of them looked at each other, their fear starting to fade. Then, a small child named Lila, no older than 5, stepped forward. She looked up at Gorr, her eyes full of innocence. "You're not scary," she said with a soft smile. "You're just big." Gorr's heart swelled with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice trembling. The villagers slowly began to relax. And one by one, they stepped forward, offering food and water to the giant. They didn't yet fully understand, but they saw the sincerity in his eyes. And for the first time, they saw Gorr not as a monster, but as a friend. Over the next few days, Gorr continued to visit the village. Slowly, the villagers began to accept him, albeit with some hesitation. The children, in particular, found comfort in his presence. They would run up to him, ask him questions, and even climb onto his massive hands. Gorr, whose heart had once been hardened by loneliness, now felt warmth as the villagers' fear turned into curiosity and acceptance. At first, it was small acts of kindness. Gorr helped carry firewood for the elders, his large hands carefully stacking the logs. He helped the farmers till the soil, his strong arms making the work easier. The villagers, who had once seen him as a threat, now saw him as a valuable member of the community. Gorr was no longer just the clay giant of the mountains, he was part of the village, a protector in his own way. Nathan, who had been the bridge between Gorr and the villagers, watched with quiet pride. He knew that this change wouldn't have happened without Gorr's willingness to open up and without the villagers choosing to trust him. One afternoon, as the sun was setting and the village gathered around the fire for the evening meal, Nathan sat beside Gorr. "I knew you'd fit in here," Nathan said, his eyes gleaming with happiness. Gorr's deep, gravelly voice echoed softly. "I never thought this day would come. To be accepted, to feel like I belong. It's more than I could have ever dreamed." Nathan smiled. "It's not just you who's changed. The villagers have learned to see beyond the surface, to understand that kindness and patience can break through fear." As the days passed, the villagers began to notice something extraordinary. Gorr's clay body, which had once been cracked and weathered, was starting to change. The deep fissures that had marred his form began to fill in, smoothing over as if mended by an invisible hand. The color of his clay lightened, and the rough texture softened, becoming almost like polished stone. At first, the villagers thought it was simply the weather or the passage of time that was causing these changes. But Nathan understood. The more Gorr was accepted, the more love and kindness he received, the more his body healed. It was as if the giant's heart, once heavy with loneliness, was now being restored along with his outward form. One evening, as Gorr sat by the river watching the stars, Nathan joined him. "Do you feel different?" Nathan asked, looking at the giant's smoother skin. Gorr smiled, a slow, deliberate movement that had once been impossible for him. "Yes. I feel lighter. Like the weight of the world is being lifted." Nathan nodded. "It's because you're no longer alone. You're surrounded by people who care." For the first time in his long existence, Gorr understood the power of love and acceptance. It wasn't just about fixing his body, it was about healing his spirit. To celebrate the newfound friendship between Gorr and the villagers, a great feast was planned in the village square. Everyone, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, contributed something to the meal. Bread, fruits, vegetables, and stews filled the tables. The air was thick with the sounds of laughter, music, and the clinking of cups. Gorr, who had once feared he would never be part of such joyous gatherings, stood at the head of the table, surrounded by his new friends. He had never known such happiness, never known that a place like this existed where he could belong. As the evening grew darker, and the stars twinkled overhead, Nathan stood and raised his cup. "To friendship," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "To kindness, to understanding, and to the giant who has shown us all that the heart is what truly matters." The villagers cheered, raising their cups in unison. Gorr, humbled and overwhelmed, stood as well. "Thank you," he said, his deep voice filled with emotion. "I never thought I would experience something like this. You've given me more than I could ever repay." The laughter and music continued long into the night. And for the first time, Gorr felt as if he were home. Weeks turned into months, and the village continued to thrive. Gorr was now a permanent fixture in the daily life of the villagers. His once solitary existence had been replaced with the warmth of community. He helped with the harvest, carried heavy loads, and even taught the children how to shape small clay figures. His enormous hands, once a symbol of fear, were now a source of comfort and strength. But as with all peaceful periods, trouble was never far behind. One day, a neighboring village, hearing rumors of the giant's presence, sent a group of armed men to confront him. The men were fearful of the giant, convinced that he was a danger to their village. Nathan, who had been talking with Gorr near the edge of the village, saw the men approach. They were armed with swords and shields, their faces set with suspicion. "Stay here," Nathan whispered to Gorr. "I'll handle this." Nathan stepped forward, his heart pounding. "What are you doing here?" he asked the men. "We've heard stories about a giant," one of the men said gruffly, "and we won't let him threaten our village." Nathan's voice was calm but firm. "This giant is no threat. He's a protector, a friend." The men scoffed. "A giant made of clay is no friend. Nathan's eyes flashed with determination. You don't know him. But I do. And he's helped us more than you can imagine. Gorr stepped forward, towering behind Nathan. I mean no harm, he said in his deep, rumbling voice. I've only come to help. For a moment, the men froze, eyeing Gorr's immense form. But Nathan stepped in front of the giant, his stance strong. Listen to me, Nathan said, his voice rising. Kindness has power. And you don't have to fear what you don't understand. After a long silence, one of the men lowered his sword, his eyes softening. We've been wrong, he admitted. Perhaps we've judged you too harshly. The men slowly backed away, lowering their weapons. And with a final, hesitant nod, they left the village. The village continued to prosper, and Gorr's presence was more important than ever. But one day, as Gorr was working near the river, he gathered the villagers together for a special gift. He had spent weeks shaping a beautiful clay statue, carefully molding the earth with his large hands. Nathan stood before the villagers, a puzzled expression on his face. Gorr's gift was a small, intricate sculpture of a heart, carved from the finest clay. It was smooth, polished, and filled with incredible detail. This is for you, Gorr said, his voice full of warmth. It's a symbol of our friendship, of how we've all grown together. Nathan's eyes welled with tears as he accepted the gift. Thank you, Gorr. This is more than I could ever ask for. The villagers gathered around, admiring the statue. It was a symbol of unity, a reminder that no matter how different someone may seem, they all had the capacity for kindness and understanding. As the years passed, Gorr and the villagers became an inseparable part of each other's lives. The village flourished, and the lessons learned from their encounter with the clay giant were passed down through generations. The story of Nathan and Gorr became a legend, a tale of friendship, courage, and the power of kindness. Gorr had once been a lonely giant, wandering the mountains in search of something he couldn't define. But through Nathan's friendship and the villagers' acceptance, he found a place where he truly belonged. Nathan, too, had learned the incredible power of compassion. He had helped transform a village's fear into understanding, and in doing so, had shown the world that sometimes, the greatest strength lies in the simplest act of kindness. And so, in the village at the foot of the great mountain, the legend of the clay giant and the boy who believed in him lived on, a testament to the enduring power of love and friendship.